by scratching the surface, you get a terrible shock. It's such it's a heinous crime.
Lady Louise Windsor had spent years avoiding royal controversy, choosing silence whenever palace tensions threatened to pull her into the spotlight. But that silence has now ended with a sentence so direct, so emotionally loaded, that every conversation inside the royal household reportedly stopped at once. Looking toward the seat forever associated with Diana's memory, Louise delivered 8 devastating words. Camilla will never sit where Diana sat. And everyone in the room understood that she meant far more than a chair. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Louise entered the private Windsor family gathering, expecting a controlled discussion about an upcoming memorial ceremony. The seating plan, a formal chart showing where each royal would sit, should have been routine. Then she saw Camilla's name placed beside a ceremonial seat historically associated with Diana, Princess of Wales. That position had once been reserved for the late princess during an important family occasion and was later kept symbolically empty, turning it into a quiet marker of memory, grief, and emotional inheritance. Louise pushed the printed card away. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. She looked directly across the table and declared, "Camilla will never sit where Diana sat." The words carried anger, sorrow, and years of restrained loyalty. The younger royal knew she could damage her relationship with Charles and the Queen Consort, yet remaining silent suddenly felt like betraying something the family had promised never to erase. Camilla did not move. She stared at Louise for several seconds, her expression tightening as the meaning settled. The challenge had not come from William, Harry, or Anne. It had come from someone she never expected to oppose her, and that made the blow more personal. Edward lowered his eyes while Sophie reached for her daughter's hand. Charles quietly folded the seating plan, a small action that revealed the depth of the problem. The king understood that this was no dispute over furniture. Diana's place represented unfinished grief, public memory, and the question of whether symbolic history could be reassigned for present convenience. The room divided without anyone raising a voice. Louise held her ground. Camilla remained silent. Sophie stayed beside her daughter, while Edward understood that the statement had opened a wound the family had spent years avoiding. Minutes later, Louise was asked to remain behind. Camilla wanted a private, face-to-face explanation of why Diana's place mattered so deeply to her. But before Louise could defend the words that stunned the palace, the family first had to confront why this quiet young woman had become the unexpected guardian of Diana's memory. Lady Louise was never expected to become the voice at the center of one of the monarchy's most painful emotional battles. She had neither demanded a senior title, nor fought for a commanding role. Yet behind her reserved manner was a young woman raised among stories of duty, loss, and the consequences of silence. For Louise, Diana was not merely a figure from history. She represented a wound the family had covered with ceremony, but never truly allowed to heal. Louise had grown up close enough to royal life to understand its pressure, but far enough from the direct line of succession to watch its conflicts without being swallowed by them. As the daughter of Prince Edward and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, she knew how quickly duty could become isolation. The direct line of succession meant the family members closest to inheriting the crown, and Louise had spent years observing what that burden did to William, Harry, and those around them. Diana's memory reached her through private family accounts, not public speeches. Louise had heard stories of the late princess's loneliness, courage, and vulnerability, along with the deep bond she shared with her sons. Those memories made the ceremonial chair feel sacred. To others, it was protocol. To her, it carried grief that had never been given an honest ending. Edward paced in silence after the meeting, while Sophie asked whether their daughter understood what she had done. Louise heard fear in her mother's voice, but she also saw pride. The trusted confidant wanted to protect her from palace retaliation, yet she knew the challenge had come from conviction, not ambition. Louise then asked why Diana's chair had been preserved for so many years. Her father hesitated. Edward finally admitted that Queen Elizabeth had once ordered the position never to be reassigned without the agreement of Diana's sons. That private instruction mattered, because the seat was not simply ceremonial. It had become a protected symbol, tied to family memory and emotional legitimacy. Camilla's stake was equally personal. The new arrangement was meant to present her as the undisputed senior royal woman at the memorial. Louise's objection threatened that hard-won acceptance and reopened every question the Queen believed had been settled. Sophie closed the door, took both of her daughter's hands and asked, "Who showed you the record?" Louise did not look away. She said she had recently been shown a private written account explaining why the chair remained empty and who had tried to change the decision. Then she gave the name. Princess Anne. Sophie froze. Edward stopped pacing. In that instant, both understood that Louise had not acted alone or impulsively. That revelation pointed back to a hidden chain of events and to one ceremony where Camilla's attempt to claim Diana's place became impossible for Louise to ignore. The statement that exploded across Windsor did not begin at the family meeting. Its true origin lay several weeks earlier, during a rehearsal conducted behind closed doors in the palace's memorial gallery. There, beneath portraits of royal women who had shaped the monarchy, Louise witnessed a small alteration with enormous meaning. A member of staff removed Diana's handwritten place marker from a ceremonial chair, replaced it with Camilla's name, and whispered that the change had been personally approved. Louise understood at once that the Royal Women of Service Memorial was no ordinary ceremony. It had been created to honor women whose work, sacrifice, and influence had shaped the crown. The ceremonial seat connected to Diana had remained empty during earlier family observances because it represented her unfinished place within the monarchy and her lasting role as the mother of the future king. Leaving it untouched was not an accident. It was a promise. The senior courtier lifted Diana's preserved card and slipped it into a storage envelope. Louise froze. The action seemed quiet, almost routine, yet to her, it felt like erasure. The palace was not simply adjusting a seating plan. It was moving aside the memory of someone who could no longer defend herself. Camilla entered before the rehearsal ended. She noticed the new card bearing her name, paused, and said nothing. That silence changed everything. Louise had hoped the substitution might be an administrative mistake. The Queen Consort's calm acceptance convinced her it was deliberate. Anne waited until the room had emptied. Then she opened the envelope, removed Diana's faded marker, and told Louise that some places could not be inherited merely because enough time had passed. The Princess Royal, meaning the special title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, then produced a copy of Queen Elizabeth's ceremonial note. Its language was clear. Diana's position could remain vacant, but it could never be absorbed into another royal woman's identity without William's consent. Louise felt grief harden into resolve. The issue was no longer rank, protocol, or personal dislike. It had become a test of whether the monarchy protected the memory of its dead or reshaped that memory to suit whoever held influence in the present. Anne placed the faded card into Louise's hands and closed the young woman's fingers around it. "Memory means nothing," she said, "unless someone is prepared to defend it when defending it becomes inconvenient." Louise made her promise then. If the palace attempted the substitution during the final family meeting, she would speak. When the promised confrontation finally arrived, Louise entered the room carrying Diana's old place card, and Camilla was already waiting for her. No aides remained in the room. No cameras recorded what followed. Camilla stood beside the disputed chair, while Louise remained near the closed door, still holding Diana's faded place card. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. One represented the monarchy's present order. The other carried the memory of a princess whose absence still shaped every royal relationship. Then Camilla asked the question everyone else had avoided. "Do you believe I have no right to sit there?" Louise felt the weight of the challenge immediately. Camilla was no longer asking about a seating plan, which was the formal arrangement showing where each royal would sit during the ceremony. She was asking whether the younger woman rejected her personally. The distinction mattered because one answer could be defended as protocol, while the other would sound like a direct attack on the Queen Consort. Louise chose her words carefully. Camilla had a crown, an official title, and a recognized place beside Charles. None of that was being denied. But Diana's emotional place beside William and Harry, and within the memory of the public, could not be transferred by palace instruction. A title could pass. A symbol built from grief could not. Camilla's anger softened into something more painful. She admitted that she had spent years entering rooms where Diana's memory seemed to arrive first. Every gesture was compared. Every success was measured against a woman whose image had become untouchable. The Queen sounded exhausted, not triumphant. She had fought for acceptance, yet still felt judged by an absence she could never answer. Louise shook, but she did not retreat. She said the cruelty of comparison did not justify taking a place deliberately preserved for another woman, especially without William's consent. Pain could explain the decision. It could not make the decision right. Camilla then revealed the first crack in the official story. She insisted she had never personally requested the chair and had given no direct approval for Diana's card to be removed. Suspicion shifted immediately toward the courtier who had claimed otherwise. Louise answered with the name behind the authorization. The alteration, she said, had come through the king's private secretary, the senior official who manages Charles's confidential business and decisions. That meant the order may have been issued in the monarch's name without William being told. Camilla reached toward Diana's place card, then stopped before touching it. Louise did not pull away. Both stared at the faded handwriting between them, until the Queen lowered her hand. "Then your accusation belongs in another room," Camilla said. She did not demand an apology. She told Louise to take the record directly to Charles. The chair had become a test of memory. But the next room would reveal who had truly tried to rewrite that memory and why Charles had allowed it. Charles expected a disagreement over ceremony. He did not expect his niece to enter his private library carrying an instruction written during his mother's reign. Louise placed the old card and copied record on the desk without accusation. Camilla stood several feet away, silent and pale. When the king recognized the late queen's handwriting, his posture changed immediately. The question was no longer whether Louise had spoken out of turn. It was whether Charles had overridden a promise the family believed untouchable. Charles still held final authority over royal ceremonies, meaning he could approve who attended, where they sat, and how the event represented the crown. Yet anything connected to Diana remained emotionally tied to William, making even a small change politically dangerous. The king admitted he had approved a wider protocol revision designed to place Camilla at the center of the memorial. He insisted, however, that he had not known Diana's preserved seat was included. Louise listened, then asked the question no one else had dared to voice. With Edward and Sophie beside her, she wanted to know how any decision carrying Diana's name could pass through the palace without someone considering William's feelings. Edward remained tense, while Sophie watched her daughter carefully, knowing the challenge had now reached the sovereign himself. Charles removed his glasses and placed them beside the record. He could not answer at once. Louise's words touched the oldest conflict of his life, the distance between private choice and public consequence. The monarch had often believed that intention could soften damage. This time, the damage had arrived before the explanation. A review of the approval revealed the truth. Charles had authorized ceremonial consolidation, a formal phrase meaning that separate symbolic positions could be combined to create one clearer order. A senior secretary had interpreted those words as permission to remove all empty places, including Diana's chair. Camilla broke her silence. She told Charles she would not accept a seat created through an interpretation that reopened old wounds and placed her directly against William's mother. The Queen's refusal carried no triumph. It sounded like exhaustion. Charles summoned the secretary and ordered the ceremony suspended until William had been told personally. He signed the temporary order, pressed the pen down harder than necessary, and pushed the page aside. "You were right to bring this to me," he told Louise. "Even if the manner has wounded us all." Louise's anger softened into sadness. She had expected punishment, not admission. Yet she understood that correcting the arrangement could not erase what had already happened. The order was reversed inside the library, but beyond its doors the consequences had already begun. and William was about to learn how close the palace came to replacing his mother's place without him. William received the news without raising his voice. That silence frightened the room more than anger would have. He read the altered seating plan once, then read his grandmother's preserved instruction twice. Catherine watched his face harden as he understood the full meaning. Diana's symbolic place had almost been reassigned through a procedural phrase, and no one had thought it necessary to consult her eldest son. When he finally spoke, he asked only one question: who stopped it? Charles told him that Louise had exposed the conflict and forced the ceremony to be suspended. The seating revision meant the official plan deciding where each royal would sit, but this change carried far more than ceremonial weight. It threatened to turn Diana's protected place into something transferable. The king explained that his niece had entered the confrontation carrying the original card and had refused to withdraw her words, even when challenged directly. William gripped the edge of the table. He said the pain was not about furniture. It came from discovering, again and again, how easily his mother's memory could be treated as an administrative inconvenience. Diana had not simply occupied a chair. She had occupied a place in the monarchy's emotional history, and every attempt to simplify that history reopened grief the prince had spent decades learning to control. Charles apologized. He admitted that he had approved the broader change without examining its consequences. William struggled to accept that explanation. Carelessness, he said, could wound just as deeply as intention when the subject was this sensitive. Catherine then identified the greater danger. Once the transfer appeared publicly, future records would treat Diana's place as though it had passed naturally to Camilla. That would make the alteration seem legitimate and almost impossible to reverse. Her warning changed the conversation from hurt to protection. William demanded a permanent written ruling. The palace, he insisted, must declare that Diana's ceremonial position belonged to her historical legacy and could never be reassigned to any living royal. Charles agreed. The consequences followed immediately. The senior secretary who interpreted the order was removed from ceremonial planning. Every seating chart was recalled, the rehearsal was cancelled, and the family received formal notice that Diana's chair would remain empty. After Charles left, William turned the faded place card over in his hands. Catherine placed her palm over his wrist, but he kept staring at the handwriting as though it had pulled him back into a grief he had never fully escaped. Then the future king made one final request. Before attending the ceremony, he wanted to see Louise alone. Yet the real turning point would not come through another order or palace meeting. It would come when William and Louise finally sat together, with no titles, advisors, or barriers between them. William found Louise alone in a small drawing room, turning Diana's place card carefully between her fingers. There were no officials present, and no prepared statement waiting on the table. For the first time since the controversy began, the conflict was stripped of crowns, protocol, and royal rank. It became a conversation between a son who had spent most of his life protecting his mother's memory and a young cousin who feared she had caused more pain than she had prevented. William had asked that Charles, Camilla, Edward, Sophie, Catherine, and every palace official remain outside. He wanted honesty without interruption. Louise began by explaining that she had never intended to humiliate the Queen Consort. She had acted because watching Diana's card being removed felt like seeing a person disappear for a second time. Louise's voice broke as the truth came out. She admitted that after challenging the seating plan, she wondered whether she had embarrassed her parents and damaged the family beyond repair. The younger royal had defended one memory, but she feared she had created another wound in the process. William did not allow that guilt to remain with her. He told Louise that the embarrassment belonged to those who let the change move forward, not to the person who found the courage to stop it. The prince understood the difference between rebellion and conscience. One tried to weaken the institution, the other prevented it from betraying its own promises. Then William made a decision no one had expected. Diana's original place marker would remain in Louise's care until the ceremony. The card was more than a piece of faded paper. It was now a protected symbol of historical memory, and he trusted the cousin who had defended it when senior figures stayed silent. Louise then revealed that Camilla had sent her a handwritten note. The Queen acknowledged that Diana's seat should remain untouched, and asked that their confrontation never become an excuse for cruelty. The message did not erase the pain, but it proved that dignity did not require denial. William proposed a final arrangement. Louise would carry the place card into the memorial gallery, while Camilla would enter through a separate aisle and take a newly designated seat beside Charles. Diana's place would remain empty. The present queen would be honored without replacing the woman who came before her. William closed Louise's fingers around the card exactly as Anne had done. "You did not speak against the monarchy," he told her. "You reminded it of something it was about to forget." Louise was no longer isolated. William was no longer excluded. Camilla no longer needed Diana's symbolic position. That private agreement settled the family's deepest dispute, but when the revised ceremony became public, one unforgettable image transformed a palace conflict into a national reckoning. The palace attempted to present the memorial as a moment of unity, but one image immediately dominated every broadcast. Lady Louise, walking into the gallery with Diana's preserved place card held against her chest. Behind her, an empty chair remained beneath a single white rose. Camilla entered moments later and took a different seat beside Charles without protest. No announcement explained the arrangement, yet the meaning was unmistakable. Diana's place had not been occupied, inherited, or erased. Buckingham Palace released a brief statement confirming that the seating reflected historical continuity, personal dignity, and respect for established family remembrance. The phrase meant the monarchy would honor the past without humiliating those serving in the present. It was careful language, but the ceremony gave it emotional force. Louise had been formally asked to place Diana's card on the empty chair before joining Edward and Sophie. Louise carried out the duty with quiet control, though the weight of the moment was impossible to hide. She placed the card down and stepped back. William watched from across the gallery, visibly moved by the cousin who had defended his mother, without turning remembrance into revenge. The prince understood what had changed. Diana's memory had been protected, but no one had been publicly destroyed to achieve it. Camilla faced the hardest moment in silence. As she passed the empty chair, the queen consort paused briefly, looked toward it, and continued to her newly assigned seat beside Charles. Her expression carried controlled sadness rather than resentment. She had accepted a boundary that preserved Diana's place, while allowing her own dignity to remain intact. The following morning, the fictional Crown Chronicle published a front page showing Louise beside the empty chair beneath the headline, "The Place That Could Not Be Taken." The image spread rapidly because it captured something larger than a seating dispute. It showed that memory could still command authority inside an institution built on succession. Outside Kensington Palace, crowds left white roses near Diana's gates. One large handwritten sign read, "Memory is not a title." That message became the defining public response. During a live evening broadcast, the presenter paused over footage of Louise placing the card and said, "A young woman with no demand for power has just reminded the most powerful family in Britain that remembrance also carries authority." The public did not read the ceremony as Camilla's defeat. They saw a rare admission that accepting the present did not require rewriting the past. Charles saw the same truth. With emotion intensifying, the king approved a permanent declaration protecting Diana's ceremonial legacy. The empty chair had spoken more powerfully than any palace defense, but one final decision was still needed to ensure that Diana's place could never again be quietly reassigned. The final decision arrived not through another confrontation, but through a declaration signed by Charles, witnessed by William, and accepted by Camilla. Diana's ceremonial position would remain permanently protected as part of the monarchy's historical memory. It would never be reassigned to a spouse, successor, or future royal figure. The chair would remain empty whenever it appeared, not as a symbol of division, but as recognition that certain human places survive death, because the love, grief, and consequences attached to them cannot be inherited. Charles signed the Royal Memorial Continuity Declaration, with William beside him, and Camilla watching in silence. The declaration was a formal palace ruling, designed to protect Diana's historic seat, original place card, and connected ceremonial symbols from future reassignment. It also created an independent position for the queen consort, ensuring that her dignity rested on her own service, beside the king, rather than on the absorption of another woman's identity. Charles faced the truth after the signatures were complete. Alone beside the empty chair, the monarch accepted that moving forward could not mean removing every reminder of the choices that had shaped his family. Diana's absence had influenced William, divided loyalties, and followed the crown through decades of public judgment. Erasing the symbol would not erase the consequences. Louise found her parents waiting after the declaration. Edward admitted that her words had frightened him because he understood how deeply they could wound the family. Yet he also told his daughter that fear did not make her wrong. Sophie took Louise's hand and said moral courage often felt like disloyalty to those who benefited from silence. The trusted confidant had feared retaliation, but she now recognized that her daughter's refusal had prevented a lasting injustice. Camilla later spoke to Louise through a private recorded family conversation. She admitted that the 8 words had wounded her, but also acknowledged that they had stopped a symbolic mistake that would have followed them both forever. The queen no longer needed Diana's position to prove her own legitimacy. Louise returned the faded place card to William. The prince placed it inside a protected memorial case, a secure display preserving important royal objects, rather than hiding it in an archive. Its meaning would remain visible. At the memorial's end, William straightened the white rose beside Diana's name and walked toward Charles and Camilla. Louise remained behind with Edward and Sophie. No one occupied the chair. No one attempted to move it. For the first time, its emptiness felt neither hostile nor unresolved. Lady Louise's declaration established the final boundary. Crowns, duties, and rank may pass, but personal history cannot be reassigned by protocol. Diana's place remained protected. Camilla received one of her own. Charles accepted responsibility, and Louise emerged not as a rebel, but as the person who forced the crown to distinguish succession from replacement. And as the family left the gallery together, the empty chair remained behind not as a wound dividing the monarchy, but as proof that the institution had finally learned how to remember without erasing, and how to move forward without pretending the past had never existed. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.